We are going to have a look at the final of the Dutch Chess Championships, which was taking place this week in the city of Utrecht. And since it was the 150th anniversary of the Dutch Chess Federation, they managed to find a spectacular venue as it was held, the event in the local football club FC Utrecht. And they, even more importantly, they managed to bring all the top players together. And in the final of this event, we have this match between the two top stars from Dutch chess, Jordan van Foreest and Anish Giri. And we're going to have a look at their tiebreak game, because in the first two games, classical time control, it was a relatively quiet game. Both games ended in a draw. But the final is going to be really spectacular. So let's have a look. Jordan playing with the white pieces against Anish. Jordan opens with 1 e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, the Italian opening, d3, bishop c5. And now Jordan goes for the move knight to c3. Very normal developing move, though at the highest levels. In a way, it's a bit more common to place your pawn on c3 instead of the knight, so that later on you have ideas of trying to expand in the center. But knight c3, of course, there cannot be anything wrong with it, and in fact it's a specialty of Jordan. In the classical game, Anish played here the move h6, stopping bishop g5 ideas, but in the tiebreak he decided to deviate with the move d6. Now bishop g5 is of course a perfectly playable option, but Jordan always plays here the move knight a4 with the idea to take the bishop on c5. So the bishop goes back to b6, and interestingly, in 3 earlier games against top players, Caruana, Savian and Fressinet, Jordan played 3 different moves. He went for the moves h3, knight takes b6 and the move c3, and for this occasion he goes for option number 4, as he played here the move a3. And you may think, what is this? Why does he play such a pawn move at the side of the board? Well, it's a sort of useful waiting move, as anytime white can decide to trade off the knight for the bishop, but he wants to wait a little bit, because if you do trade off immediately, you do open up the file for the rook on a8, so there's no need to take immediately, and after a3, black cannot really avoid the exchange of knight versus bishop. If you try to play something like bishop a5, there is this move b4 and the bishop gotta go back. So that doesn't make sense. Black instead played here the move h6, and white consciously refrains from capturing the bishop yet. No need to release the tension. Castling kingside played by both sides, and now h3, preventing black from getting its bishop to g4. And now remarkable decision by Anish, but a very instructive move. He played here the move queen e8. And this may look quite bizarre. At first you would probably have expected the bishop to be developed somehow. But here the queen is keeping an eye on that knight. White plays b4, sets a little trap, as the knight is unprotected and you would like to take on b4, believing that you sacrifice the knight, you get a pawn for it, but later on you will win back that knight on a4. But after a takes b4, the knight is protected, so in fact you do lose a piece. That cannot be played. Anish played here the move bishop e6, and after bishop takes e6, interesting moment. You have two options of recapturing, either with the queen, which is very solid, but recapturing with the f-pawn is a very typical plan in a lot of Italian openings. Your double pawns, they're not bad at all. In fact, they guard quite a number of nice central squares, but most importantly, you do open up the f-file for the rook, and you have simple plans of bringing your queen somewhere out, either to g6 or h5. Maybe you can double the rooks and look for ways to build up an initiative against the white king. Very typical plan. If you play the Italian, keep this in mind. It's not bad at all to have these double pawns. White plays c3, and now Anish goes for knight e7, believing that the knight is not doing that much on c6. It's on its way to the king side. And now, interesting moment, as Jordan played here the move rook a2. Also here you may think this is strange looking developing move, but you're kind of flexible. It's one of the advantages of not having your pawns on the second rank. You are able to develop your rook along the second rank, and who knows, maybe it's useful to protect the pawn on f2. Later on, there are other ideas with the rook as well, but we will see there are also drawbacks having the rook on the second rank. Anish goes knight h5, and now finally knight takes b6, a takes b6 is played. And what should white do now? I think a very typical move for a lot of these structures is to try to play on the queen side, try to look for ways to build up the tension there, try to open up files, so that once the position will get opened on the queen side, it will be harder for black to carry out an attack. But instead, Jordan played the move g3, preventing the knight from coming in to f4. But now b5 is played. So now it's interesting that this pawn covers the square a4, which means that white is ending up with a backward pawn on the half-open file, and that can potentially become a problem. White goes king g2, supporting the knight on f3 a little bit more, and black goes b6. You may think, what is black doing? Well, very useful pawn moves, which will become clear later what the exact point is. Knight h2, opening up the path for the queen, but okay, the knight is still protected, so no need to worry. On the other hand, the knight itself cannot really do that much, so black decided to drop back with a knight to f6, and a very logical move would be here to bring the knight to g4. The knight isn't doing that well on h2, and trying to initiate some exchanges seems very logical. But instead, Jordan plays bishop e3, bringing the bishop into the game. But I think this is already an imprecise move, and we will see why immediately. Because black plays here this move, queen c6, keeping the threat alive against the pawn on c3. Pawn is in trouble. And now Jordan decided to go back with a bishop. Probably he didn't expect the move at all. But now, look what black is going to do. Another advantage of having these double pawns in the center is that you can always consider expanding in the center with the move d5. With one of the main points being that the queen is in the same diagonal of the white king. If you do take on d5, it's queen takes d5 with check, and you do pick up the rook. Here we see unprotected pieces. They are always a problem. Jordan played f3. All the pawns are no longer on the second rank. Very ambitious, enterprising pawn play by white, but of course it also leads to new weaknesses. Rook 88, the rook comes over to the d file, so there are possible ideas of opening up the file when the rook is excellently placed there. Queen e2, the queen gets out of the file, and here rook d7. So who knows, black is about to double rooks anytime soon. Knight g4, and now of course the rook is needed to keep the knight protected. You may take on g4 when white can recapture with the h-pawn. And later on this double pawn can be used in order to launch an attack, making use of the hook on h6. No need to cooperate. Knight g6 was played to protect the pawn on e5, because that was a serious threat by white. And here, what would you do? I think in the blitz game, you would probably instantly take the knight on f6 and take it from there. The position is still roughly equal. Difficult to say if one side is better here. Just pretty playable for both sides. But Jordan wants to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. Drops back with a knight to f2, overprotecting the pawn on e4. But now the rooks are not going to the d file, but to the f file. And you can see there are potential problems with this pawn on f3. Knight g4 is still a reasonable move, but since you just have dropped back with your knight to f2, I think this was not on Jordan's mind. But looking at his next move, it's an indication that he's losing track here. He played king h2, which frankly I failed to understand. Apart from the fact that your king is no longer on this diagonal, there are some other issues. Because queen d7 played, it's kind of a maneuvering game. All 16 pawns still on the board. No, any open files, only a half open file for the black rooks. So a lot of maneuvering. Bishop e3, knight h7. Look, now the pawn on f3 is under threat, and the king goes back to protect the pawn. And here Anish feels it's the moment to try to force matters. Plays the move d4, putting pressure on the bishop and intending to undouble the pawns. Very understandable. If you try to just keep the bishop on the board, and also the double pawns, of course, there is d takes c3, bishop takes c3, and now knight g5, and the pawn on f3 is in big trouble as it's under attack 3 times. So that would lead to a material gain for black. Instead, c takes d4 was played. Now black no longer has double pawns. The bishop is under threat again. Bishop went back to c1 to keep the second rank free for the rook. Makes no sense to place the bishop on d2. But now, the key moment. Very interesting decision by black. Rook takes f3. And this is an interesting change of character of play, as we do get a sequence in which black is getting a queen versus 2 rooks. And this is always an interesting battle. I should add also that black does have an extra pawn, so it's a queen and a pawn versus 2 rooks. Sometimes the 2 rooks are better, sometimes the queen. And it all depends on whether the rooks are able to work together nicely. But I think that black's pawn structure is very nice, and the rooks, they are not looking too great at all. One very typical idea for black here would be to play c5, bringing up the pawn, and after b takes c5, you have a lot of possibilities to break through. But I think in general, Anish thought that it makes no sense to open the files. The more files are getting opened, the easier it will be for the rooks. So instead, knight e5 check played. King got to go back. And now a totally different plan. With a knight on e5, white is about to go bishop f4, and that is prevented by black's next move, g5, covering the f4 square. Rook c2. Look at this knight. It's not that happy at all. It's now rerouted via f8, and after bishop b2, it goes to g6. Now you may think the knight is still not very impressive at all. But after rook fc1, white is about to take the pawn on c7. Black goes for the move c6. Everything is still nicely covered, and you see white's rooks are unable to infiltrate at the moment. So the rook goes back to f1. This is the open file, but still very difficult to infiltrate. And now I think Anish, his play in this game, it's a blitz game. And in any case, I thought his play is quite impressive, especially with his following move. He shows very deep understanding as he brings up another pawn, goes for the move h5. Bishop c1, attacking the pawn on g5, queen e7, protecting the pawn, bishop d2, and now the move h4 is played. This was all black's idea. Now we see why the knight is wonderfully placed on g6. If you do take on h4, it's a terribly weakening move. Knight takes h4 check. These knights are about to jump in, and if you go to h1, things are getting even worse because the queen could come in via f6 to f3, giving a check with mating threats on g2. And of course the knight from f2 is unable to move because the rook is unprotected. So this is just totally crushing. You see that white is unable to activate the rooks. G takes h4 is like suicide. You cannot do that yourself. If you play g4, trying to keep the king side closed, not allowing the knight to come in. Now the f4 square is weak. You cannot really jump in because the bishop still covers it. But a very nice plan here for black would be to come with the queen to d6, hinting at queen g3 ideas. You can move the knight away. For instance, if white goes rook c1, you can just take on d3. Splendid piece sacrifice with the point that you will regain and just capture all the pawns with check. This is completely hopeless. So with this move h4, you understand that white's main problem is he cannot maintain that pawn on g3. Knight g4 played. Now the knights were swapped, and the move queen d6 is played. Once again, big threat against the pawn on g3. So g takes h4, And what would you do? You have two possible recaptures, either with a knight or with a pawn. But don't take with a knight, because after knight takes, there's king h3, and the g3 and h2 squares are still covered. The queen is unable to infiltrate. Black is not winning here. After g takes h4 though, the queen is about to enter on g3. That looks really good. And there are no good ways to deal with the threats. If you go rook f3, which was played in the game, then the move c5 is played. Now, finally, at the end of the game, we see why these double pawns, they are so useful. It was not only for the open file earlier on, but it's to support the center. So capturing towards the center will help your pawn formation to make progress, gain space in the long run. Bishop g5. White is looking for counterplay, but now the queen comes in, attacks the bishop. Bishop goes to h6. Now the move c4 was played. Look at these pawns, wonderful. Pawn on c4 cannot really be taken because of queen takes e4, attacking the rook. If the rook goes away to double on the f file, there is knight e5, for instance, and the rook is pinned, so you're winning material. It's game over. Pawn on c4 cannot be taken as the pawn on e4 is eventually hanging. King h3 on the board. And now queen c7. The queen is supporting the pawn on c4, but more importantly, now after bishop to g5, the knight comes to e5 to attack the rook. Rook goes away, it went to f6. But you see there are huge problems with the pawn on d3. But even worse, Anish is not caring about these pawns. He is playing the move queen g7, attacking the bishop. And the bishop also got to retain control over that rook on f6. If you do take with the bishop on h4, it's queen takes g4 with check. If you play king h2, it's queen takes h4, it's game over. With check, you're going to pick up the rook next. Therefore, the only way to support the bishop is by taking with the king on h4. But now beautiful move by Anish as he drops back with a knight to f7 to tickle this bishop. If the bishop goes away, the rook is hanging. And you cannot protect the bishop any further. So white is going to lose material eventually. Rook takes f7 played. Queen takes. D takes c4. White is hoping to trade off as many pawns as possible. But he doesn't get a chance to do so. d3. Attacking the rook. Rook c3. Queen f2 check. And you have a problem. If you go king h3, then the d pawn is just moving forward. The queen is protecting it. No time to take it. Case of rook d3, it's queen f1 with a double attack. You're winning the rook. So instead, king h5 was played. But now it's queen to h2. And white is going to lose material. In the game, they follow bishop h4. But let me show you after king g6. The simplest line is a check. As always, first look at the forcing moves. King f6. And now it's queen g7. Check. The king takes pawn. And it's queen takes c3. Game over. Last move of the game is bishop to h4, stopping the check. But now the queen comes into to e5 with a double attack, with check, attacking the rook. This is simply too much. And with this victory, Anish Giri won another Dutch championship by defeating his main rival in the final. Absolutely very instructive game. Not only like it's a final game, like, okay, a lot of drama involved, but really nice technical performance by Dutch #1. And I think by looking at this, I learned a lot of how to play with the queen versus two rooks. And I hope you did the same. Thanks for watching. Drop some comments if you like the video. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon again. Bye bye.